Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Thanks for joining. So today I'm joined with Amanda Vining, our Global Chief of Sales and Customer Officer. And my name is James Mcilvenna. I'm Global Director of Customer Experience and Global Head of Onboarding at Corporate Traveller. We've got a really interesting topic which we're going to be digging into today. So we're going to be looking at something that's very topical right now, which is how do we overcome decision roadblocks and look at smarter business travel strategies. So we've got a fair few things to dig into today. So mainly the first things we'll kick off with is looking at the current industry factors contributing to decision paralysis. So there's a fair bit going on in the industry right now, and obviously the wider economic climate. So we'll dig into that to begin with. We'll then look at what happens if we don't make decisions. So the cost of inaction and the implications that come from that. And then finally, we've got a few tools and tips that we can dig into to look at how we can potentially streamline the decision-making process and take a bit of the burden away from making those big decisions. So I'll pass over to Amanda because we've got our first question that we'll jump straight right into, which is what really causes decision paralysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So, James, I'm really excited to talk about this subject here because it's something that we're really dealing with a lot in the marketplace. The main reason why customers are not moving forward is essentially making no decision at all. And our intention in today's webinar is to really gear up those listening with some tips and tricks and just real insights into how they can make that decision easier, or really commit to what they want their future to look like in terms of travel management, because it is an important decision to make. Well, it's one that we often feel that we can do ourselves. It's not necessarily one that we should do ourselves because travel is so acutely personal. It has the ability to impact employee satisfaction while simultaneously being most organizations' largest controllable expense. However, with all of that said, it's a really confusing time in the travel marketplace right now where you or I or many that have been doing this for a while, we're used to making decisions based off of really easy criteria. I'm going to work with an agency. It's going to be a lower price if I book online or offline. And it's just that simple. Who do I believe can deliver the best experience? That's really changed, where there's a lot of options. Demand has certainly increased as people have been not only brought back into offices, but brought back out on the road. That demand has only generated more, small meetings and events, more complexity to the travel, and just needing new needs to be met. There's the fact that there's higher prices alongside that demand and a lot more choice, new phrasing as well as supply, as things like NDC have entered. The internal scrutiny is higher than ever. More people are just getting their hands in the pot on who their decision should be and what needs it's needing for each various cohort within their business. And then again, just that overwhelming, what does this mean to the entire ecosystem that we operate within? And really, what are the main outcomes that we're trying to achieve? Where a lot of organizations are starting or orienting their experience looking for a travel management company. And then they find themselves asking questions from everything from how they pay for travel to their ERP to their HRIS system. So it's just really an overwhelming time for a lot of companies that are trying to make a choice. And hopefully today we can help make that a little easier for them.
Yeah, I hear you. It's almost the paradox of choice, right? We've got so much choice that it is quite hard to sometimes make a decision. Would you say that there's probably more choice in the TMC landscape now than ever before?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got your players that have been around for quite some time doing this, and then you've got a lot of new entrants that are still really trying to determine their own identity. There's a lot of cross-pollination between financial services and fintech and expense and travel, and different organizations might have what's right for them, especially in a startup environment. So a lot of decision makers, as I said, are originally saying, I'm trying to solve a need for my travelers getting back on the road, and now are kind of at a place of what else am I changing internally? So the choices are endless. Our choices range all the way from being unmanaged and doing things yourself up to, multiple tens of options and travel management companies. So that leaves a lot of buyers confused as to who is the right choice for their organization.
Yeah. And we know, obviously, the current economic climate, things are tricky, there's budget constraints, everything's probably more under the microscope than ever before. And I think certainly from what I see, buyers sometimes, don't necessarily want to put their head above the parapet and make a decision
Right.
that can go one of either way, just because everything is so under such scrutiny at the minute.
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely interesting times. And look, hopefully, the good news is what we'll dig in today is some ways to kind of navigate those muddy waters, and hopefully have some tips to kind of come to clarity when it comes to making the decision. So that's great. I think we've covered a fair bit there to kind of set the scene. Flipping it ahead, just kind of continuing with what I was saying about the temptation to not make a decision. What do you see as the potential risks associated with that, and the cost of inaction?
Yeah, I think about this all the time because if I was putting myself in the shoes of a decision maker and I'm trying to understand, okay, I've got this access where, I want my people to have a great experience, but is with that experience, the perception is often the cost is increasing upon that same access, right? And I would really challenge that and think about from a quantifiable perspective, what is the inaction of not moving forward with a decision? So for me, that really ranges. It can be a plethora of things. But if your employees are not satisfied when they are on the road, there is disruption very frequently. At least 20% of what we see in air travel is disrupted from causes that are not ones that we want there to be. But naturally, there could be a pilot shortage, there can be inclement weather, there can be absolutely anything, a bust wheel on a runway that can cause a friction point that isn't anticipated. And then there's an additional 20 or 30% that is meeting change, that is disruption we cause ourselves, that we're able to get home a little bit earlier from that meeting than anticipated, or we need to add 3 meetings, or we need to add a stop. So there's so much that can be impacted for your people if you're not giving them the opportunity to have better experiences when they're already in an incredibly difficult or strenuous time. We've seen everything from high turnover in executive cohorts where they're not being treated well when they're traveling, and that's an expectation of 20 or 50% that can be really right-sized by the appropriate policy. I know in just a couple recent examples with our clients, we've seen everything from policy transformation around really nuanced items but made material impacts. One was changing an entire SVP and EVP cohort to not be about their title as much as it's how frequent they travel, and allowing things like business class if they're traveling more than 4 times a year over 6 hours, as opposed to everyone in a specific cohort is going to be treated in the same way. We've seen everything from wanting to ensure that executive assistants are well retained and giving them the experience of working with someone that can be that liaison extension to their leader, and then tracked against those. So it's really quantifying your employee satisfaction, retention, and those elements are really important. The other big ones are the wasted resources against your budgetary constraints. So things like managing credits, making sure that people are not just, consistently changing based off of their own personal preference, that you're able to put some ceilings in play when they can pick their preferred airline, but it's not of detriment to the organization overall. There's duty of care elements. It's a scary time in travel, especially in some of the regions, and certainly the one that I live and work within. That we've had a lot of challenges with air travel lately, that there's an accountability and responsibility to our people to know where they are and to make sure that they're safe and to be able to interact back. So that's certainly one. And then just making sure that they're getting the appropriate revenue opportunities off of their own spend. Doesn't take much to be able to, push a little bit of power on this large controllable expense within an organization, and then just making sure that they're having, the right retention that they want. So the cost of inaction for me is really thinking about, as an organization, not just what quantifiable ROI can this travel management company that I'm meeting with bring to me, but if I don't do this, what pain does that cost my company? If I make no decision at all, what is that going to cost me? Thinking about that in terms of employee satisfaction, but also in terms of this, what is often the largest controllable expense, largely between number 3 and number 5 for organizations that they spend. What are we actually losing by not making a choice here? So just the more you can make it quantifiable, the more power you can have in getting yourself out of a state of paralysis and making a decision.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess the phrase I always think about with this topic is that not making a decision is still making a decision, right? Quite often there's the misconception that if you don't move and don't kind of make that leap of faith to change, that things are just going to be steady. But ultimately every day, week, month that goes by not making a decision, you're still committing to potentially an inferior solution for your business and all of those
Yep.
impacts that you've just talked about.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, perfect. So let's jump on. We've got a few more meaty topics to tackle. So I guess building from that, how can you overcome roadblocks in selecting a TMC? What are the kind of key things that you think need to be unpicked?
Yeah, and I'd love to talk to from some of your perspectives on here too. And I know we'll get into more of this in a moment with some different methodologies and whatnot we can use. But for me, I don't mean to overly simplify it, but in a complicated state, I always go like, how do you take the complex and make it really simple? There's so much choice and there's just a plethora of options. It's really going back to why you got into this in the first place. Like, don't ever be dissuaded by what is good for someone else that you're working with, if it was not your original intention. So, if you went into this process because you want to give your people better experiences when they're on the road, and you want to make sure that you are bringing cost savings so that your organization can grow in the way that you intend it to, and now all of a sudden you're talking about change management of your credit card, but that's not why you started this. That's okay to really own and control that. So, I think the first step for me is always really knowing why you got into this in the first place so that you're not going to be hit with unforeseen roadblocks of additional change management that you're not up for or ready for. Another big one for me is really making sure that you multi-thread your decision-making process. Travel, it interacts at multiple points. You're going to need someone from your financial side of the house that's going to want to make sure that the integrations are correct and it is going to be a savings. You're going to have people that care a lot about the servicing. It's so personal to them. So making sure that you have a well-rounded decision-making pool is something that is really important as well, and ensuring that those individuals have a voice and are empowered. So I always say, bring in your top travelers. They're the ones who can really teach you the importance of this. Bring in your EAs. And one of the biggest indicators for us on our accounts that don't get stuck and this paralysis is how many people they had involved in early meetings. So that is, in our world, the number one indicator of a deal's progression. So I have to imagine that if you're involving more stakeholders that are naturally going to have questions later from the initial meetings, it can really help you identify what is most important to you. So those would be some of mine, but I'm certainly keen to hear yours as well.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with the getting people involved. Certainly very important. I think it's about getting that balance right. You want to make sure that you've got the right people in the room. You're kind of building your squad to make those decisions, but equally not making sure that it muddies the waters and there's kind of different competing priorities and that ultimately adds that confusion. I think the other thing that I always think about with roadblocks and how to kind of simplify it is really drilling down into what is the core objectives that you're trying to improve. There's so much information out there. TMCs have more and more capabilities and elements to their offering. So it can be confusing if there's all these different things that a TMC could do. It's kind of more about focusing in and honing in on kind of what you want them to do for you. So for me, it all peels back to that true understanding of why you're doing this. What are the core objectives that you want to achieve, and really honing in on that information, because you can have information overload. There can be so much information that it's hard to differentiate, hard to pick apart, and you're kind of inundated with so much information that you can't make a decision. So that's for me one of the crucial elements. The other bit that I think that balances with that, we'll talk about how to quantify, how to score in a little bit, but there's definitely something to be said with trusting your gut, and I guess accepting that every decision has an element of uncertainty and being comfortable with that. I think generally, trusting your gut and kind of figuring out who you resonate with, which TMC you feel an immediate partnership with, it is pretty critical to making the right decision, because ultimately we're talking about a long-term partnership. You, as Amanda said previously, you want to select someone that is going to make you look good, make your program tick and everything run smoothly. So I always feel that with these decisions and when we're looking at vendors ourselves as a business, there's definitely a big part of going with who you kind of feel in your gut is the right choice, because there can be a lot of information, as I said, a lot of similarities, but there's definitely something to be said about who really kind of hits the mark early on and who makes a really positive first impression. So that's kind of the main areas I think we can look to overcome those roadblocks. And I guess going hand in hand with that, there's tools and techniques that we can use to streamline the decision making process. One of which is going back to the quantification of things. So this is potentially an oversimplification, but what this is trying to kind of construe is look at the core objectives, the things that are really important to you as a business. And in this case, we've selected things like technology, service level, costs, sustainability, and ROI visibility. There might be a plethora of other things that are of importance, but breaking it back down to those kind of minimum standards of what are the things that are most important, and how does your current solution compare with the potential solutions you're looking to move to. And you can throw some numbers in here. Obviously, look at kind of the weightings, which of those priorities are higher than others, and really digging into kind of what the current solution is looking like in terms of performance versus those metrics, and how the potential other TMCs are performing against them. So that's definitely something that I would look at to kind of have a bit more clarity around how to quantify things. Obviously, going hand in hand with that, you really need to understand your buying motives, kind of what are the key things that you're looking to achieve. And going back to what I was saying previously, when there are so many different facets to a travel management company, you need to be really confident and really assured in the things that you want from the TMC. And it's all right to not want everything that a TMC does. I think sometimes that's where things can get tricky. You look at all the things that could be done and try to apply them to your travel program. Whereas what can be most effective is actually saying, what, that is great that you can do that, but it's not for us. It's not of importance for us right now. It might be in the future, but right now we're going to purely score and focus in on 2 or 3 things that are of utmost importance. There are deal breakers. We need a TMC that can really hammer these home for us, and kind of making sure they're the ones that you build your scoring matrix and decision-making process around. So avoidance of overcomplication and that too much noise, I think, is critical to making a firm decision that you can feel comfortable with. Okay, so look, that's a little bit about kind of my views on things. But obviously, Amanda, you deal with this day in, day out. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how we build on this.
Yeah, absolutely agree with everything you had to say, James. For me, what really mattered there that you covered was balancing cost and experience, ensuring that you're making a data-driven decision. And I think lastly, it's just once you get to the scoring methodology or you're going through your processes and your evaluation, it's really knowing how long you're looking for partnership. I always use the quote, you can buy right or you can buy twice. Travel, if it's one of those areas where you don't want to have to make multiple changes in a short period of time, and you want to make sure that you're buying right. So ensuring that you're picking a partner that either has the tenure, the experience, the cultural alignment, or the right resources to know that that partnership is going to be brought through in the same timeline that you are looking for. If you're not looking to make a change for a few years, making sure that you really believe that the partner that you are choosing is going to hold your hand through not only the onboarding of the process, but what that 3-year growth trajectory looks like for you. So couldn't agree with more with everything you said. And it's really just like that gut feel that we trust of knowing you're picking the right partner.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess with an exercise like this or any scoring index, it doesn't have to be a one and done, right? Like, you don't need to have a clear decision. It's great if you do, but if you do have a couple of TMCs that are pretty neck and neck, you can rinse and repeat, right? Bring them back in, focus on those kind of key areas, and look to almost compartmentalize it. Even if you do it as a 2-step, 3-step process, like, obviously, you don't want to over cook the process, but at the same time, if you start with 5 TMCs that are in the mix, and once you put it through this scoring matrix, there's 3 that are clearly head and shoulders above the other 2. You can whittle it down, and sometimes, I guess, compartmentalizing like that can help the kind of pressure around making the decision, and it becomes more incremental, while still sticking with a pretty swift process where possible.
Yeah. And the other thing that's important with these indexes is also kind of scoring. If you're an unmanaged program or you're like working with multiple different travel management companies, you're doing a bit of half and half, doing a bit of a scoring to see where you are and then where you aspire to is equally important. Like in our world, because we work with startup to mid-market size organizations, nearly half of who comes into our world has simply outgrown doing things on their own, and they're now looking to bring in a travel management company. But having a bench is also really helpful to make it more quantifiable, to say, well, there is a reason we're going to do this because we're really not feeling like we're getting what we need in any of these core areas. So just remembering that, like, even if you're starting somewhere, it's in a place where you're doing things on your own, that's okay, to bring in these type of methods and kind of do a pulse check of where you are to versus where you're trying to get to.
Oh, 100%. And I would be fascinated. I don't know about you, Amanda, but I would love to have looked back at companies' scoring indexes in 2025 versus 10 years ago to see how priorities shift and change, not just in the current climate, but as businesses, grow and diversify. So yeah, it's definitely a methodology that can hopefully stand the test of time. But yeah, messages keep it simple, and it all revolves around a true understanding of what you want to achieve as your overarching objectives.
Yep.
And look, we've got a bit of a game that we'll play around this. So putting a few fictional companies through this index, we'll talk about whether we're going to stick or switch. So in this first example, we've got ThinkTech, which is a company with a high volume of young employees, primarily focuses on simple domestic travel, has an established internal tech culture. They focus on TMC tech connecting to internal systems. They rely on a high ability to pivot quickly between TMCs, naturally high staff turnover, just starting to think about sustainability, and they're focusing on minimizing short-term costs. So through this scoring index, we've said you see through those company traits, there's obviously a big emphasis on technology and a young employee base that are going to be very tech savvy. So tech is the key buying motive here. So that scores a 9 out of 10. The service weight level is 5. Obviously more going online, but there's still obviously a reliance on some element of service. Costs, we can see very important both from the short-term perspective. So that scored an 8. And sustainability and ROI, similar sort of level to service. So, of somewhat importance, but kind of paling in comparison to the tech and the cost objectives. And similarly, conversely, I guess we've got another example company. So executives traveling very frequently, 70% of the travel is international, 30% domestic, employees across various demographics, looking for a long-term partner, so someone that they can really build with and kind of continuously improve and hit travel goals over the next 5 to 10 years. Very people-centric, so obviously key emphasis on the travel experience piece, balanced perspective of value against costs. They've got a established and robust sustainability progress, and slightly risk adverse. So in this scoring matrix, obviously, the tech is of less importance to our first example company. Service is right up there at the top with a 9 out of 10. Cost and sustainability, similarly, sort of middle of the pack. And the ROI visibility, again, pretty important, but not quite as important as service level. So I guess similar sort of theory, obviously, would be looking for a company in this space that's obviously known for their service levels. They're going to have a one-to-one relationship both on the service side, but also it seems from this kind of description of the company that their CS or account management is going to be critical. They want someone that's going to partner with them, build, truly understand their goals, build with them, and help them continuously evolve their travel program over those years. So I'm guessing, a bit of a flip side to the one we just spoke about.
Yeah, if companies that are really tech first, and that's great. It's all about knowing who your people are and knowing what your culture is. Like, you might have more flexibility to try something that's more automated or self-serving, or it might just be natural in your culture. And if you were to change twice, it also wouldn't be a massive deterrent to your culture. Whereas in a company like this, looking for 5 or 10 years potential partnership, have executive assistants that are obviously going to be booking on behalf of the executives, I imagine are probably going to be going to obscure locations if they're traveling 70% of the time international, where 24/7, 365, really high experiences, even in an after hours environment, are probably really important to them. So if I was in this organization, I would really be thinking about how much tenure is coming into the room. What type of level of experience do these individuals have that I'm meeting with? what are my top destinations? And I want to work with people that have maybe booked those more boutique or obscure properties in those destinations that potentially have relationships and partnerships where if one of my execs is going to be late or change their mind, that I'm going to have flexibility. If I was spending 70% of my budgets on international routes, which is very reflective of many of our customers. Both examples are reflective of our customers. But in those environments, there are opportunities for cost savings, but there are also moments where on one transaction, making a change or switching or doing a status match or having that type of normalcy in the day-to-day booking is really important because it goes a long way. You could change what city you're flying out of being Gatwick or Heathrow or New Jersey or New York, and fly maybe one carrier on the way out and another on the way back and save thousands of dollars on what these type of tickets are. So for me, it's really probably less taking the risk, especially it says right here they're risk averse, to go with the startup or new type of agency and really looking for someone that they can be even part of interviewing those agents that are going to work with their people, understanding the level of dedication, having a really ironclad SLA that they're comfortable with, and just making sure they're holding the hand through the process. But yes, also agree. Who's going to be managing this from an account management perspective is of critical importance as well, so that you make sure you're maximizing that money that you're spending on all those international routings, which definitely add up.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I guess with these examples, they are, polar opposites, and they are probably towards the extremes in terms of their leanings, whether it be tech or service. But I think probably in more of a real life example, you've kind of got almost a triangle or a Venn diagram. I often think of this, where you've got the balance between, say, service at the tip of the triangle, and then you've got your cost and technology as the other points of the triangle.
Yeah.
And what I think is quite an interesting exercise is to almost like plot where you are as a business in terms of which ones are you closest to, and I think that can be helped to steer people in the right direction. If you are bang in the middle of the road, you obviously want a company that is kind of multifaceted and can have very strong offerings for both all three of those propositions. Whereas if you kind of pin yourself closer to the service point in this example, then obviously you really want to make sure you've got those one-to-one relationships, and that service level is obviously going to be of utmost importance. So that's another little technique that can be used. And what we've got here is kind of the workings. So we can see TMC1, TMC2 in this example. For company 2, you can see that this TMC here on the right hand side, TMC2, has got the highest combined score. So you can see ROI visibility, service level are the areas in which they're much higher, and there definitely would be the strongest fit or the best fit for that example. So Amanda, just the $1 million question. The current solution is scoring 98. The first TMC that they looked at was 129, and TMC2 scoring at 198. Is that enough to switch?
I would think it is. Yes, I think if we're doubling here, we're definitely looking towards a switch.
Yeah, perfect. And I guess playing devil's advocate, what would you recommend if there's kind of parity or potentially a slight edge with a potential TMC versus the incumbent? Like, where's the tipping point in terms of making that leap of faith to change?
Yeah, for me, I always think about this in terms of like, ultimately it's our job for those that we're humbled enough to get like the honor that is being a partner. Like that's who we're looking for. We're looking for partnerships to help organizations continue to scale, continue to take off, and take this burden of travel kind of off of them and put it on us so that we can control this expense for them and also hopefully take good care of their people while we're doing it. And I think for me, it's like I'm so acutely aware that our job is to make them look good internally. Like if they select us and they task us with that, then it is our responsibility to deliver what we have articulated to them that we will. So it's not always easy to suss out. But if you're pretty close, and I don't know that this one's close, right? They're far enough apart that I think the 198 should probably take it home there. But if something's close, it's really being transparent with the vendors and saying, I'm having a hard time deciding this. There's a lot of similarity. It's hard for me to quantify what you all are going to bring to me in terms of the cost base or what that ROI visibility or return is going to be. What can you give to me that is going to solidify that? Or if there's something that would make your life a lot easier internally in terms of what does value mean to you? Is it that they're doing an RFP for your hotels to drive down costs? Is it that they're going to change buying behavior at the individual level to increase your advance purchase or give you better economies of scale? What are you looking for? And really tasking those remaining two travel management companies that are in the final with, how would you deliver that value for me? Making it more understandable of, okay, well then with that account management, what does those hours look like? What do those SLAs look like? But getting yourself to a point where you can have confidence that that partner that you're choosing is going to be there with you with the appropriate time period that you want them to. Other like flags for me or indicators, I know when I always think about this, like in terms of when we're buying a product or service that we buy all the time in different areas. But who do I believe is going to deliver it? Who's going to make my job a little bit easier internally to produce what I need for my respective leaders? Who really wants that partnership and is willing to do like that extra at the end and really just kind of set themselves apart and really to make it easier. So the more that you can do and identify, but I always am like, don't be afraid to ask. See who will jump through those hoops for you to win your business are the same people that are going to jump through hoops for you to maintain and onboard your business well. So I always say when you're really down to two, let them know and see who will earn it. And you'll typically find that someone will.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess it's that balance between, doing your due diligence, getting all the information you need, but not really overcomplicating the process. We've seen, lots of RFPs, RFIs, probably for smaller travel programs over recent years. And I actually was on the other side of the fence recently. We're looking to appoint a vendor internally, and we were pretty much there. We had kind of one or two that were our finalists, and because of the nature of the kind of program, we actually decided that we'd get procurement lens on it and build it into an RFP. And my initial thought was when we were going down the RFP route was, this will elongate the process, and it's going to be masses and masses of information to churn through. But actually, I was pretty assured from our procurement team that when you go down this process, you can still relatively limit the information that you require. So I think that's often a common misconception. Going down the RFP routes is often associated with these 20-page documents, but actually you can still use the framework as we've demonstrated today and simplify it to get the same results. And it might not be to the extent of this simplification, but the purpose of this is to kind of portray that we don't need 20-page documents to be able to quantify something.
Yeah. And it helps the internal stakeholders too, right? Like when you do your due diligence and you feel confident in that decision and you score it and you have involved the right stakeholders. And it's also really easy to say, like, we as a collective have made this decision based off of these things. And then how are we delivering against these same targets? So I chose you because you were going to give me much better tech, or because you were going to take care of our executives in a way that was really meaningful to their executive assistant. Like, how are you all delivering on that? And even thinking about like, well, what would the following of surveying be for those various areas? So it just kind of, when you stress the importance, then it allows you to go, okay, now what is my appropriate follow-up? And then for your own internal audience, it's just like we are collectively making this choice. So now we have to, measure ourselves towards these like-minded goals. So I'm on the same page. I just think it makes things clearer for sure.
Amazing. Okay, so we'll just jump on from that. We've got a few more scoring indexes that we can definitely share if any viewers are interested. But once the decision's been made, how do we go about quantifying the success of a change in TMC? What's your top tips in this space, Amanda?
Yeah, for me, it's so many things that quantify what is success. I think seeing what your adoption looks like is definitely a success. So how much of your program potentially was leaking outside of it that has now been adopted is definitely a big indicator. The first initial months of trading are one of the biggest indicators in how well that account will trade into the future. So certainly you want to try to get as much adoption and stickiness in the beginning as possible. Another big one for us is all of the surveying and research that we do, what we call internally our voice of customer program, but really making sure that all cohorts within your company are satisfied is really important too, whether they're orienting their experience online or with an agent, or whether they're interacting with our after hours solutions. You want to make sure that there's a real level of satisfaction within the multiple cohorts, which they require different things. Your people that are booking online versus your executive assistant to the CEO are going to have different satisfaction indexes, but they're both of critical importance. So I think that's a really big one. And then lastly, it's really just how you quantify the savings. It's really a cumbersome experience to imagine how to have savings on travel. So for me, it's really about those indicators that are telling you in real time, you would have been paying this fare, but you're able to pay this fare with us. Or you would have not been able to have that hotel that you no-showed to not charge you for the first night, but we were able to go ahead and take care of that for you. Or you had an employee leave and we were able to change the credit that you had to this employee instead, and we've saved you. So I think for me, it's also, this is a big number. You spend a lot of money on travel. It is our responsibility to make that a better experience for you and to bring savings to your organization. So being able to make that quantifiable is of such critical importance. So it's also being able to bring those metrics forward, especially on like a quarterly basis, so that you go, okay, this is what I'm getting out of my TMC relationship. So for me, it's really about all of the things that we've talked about today. It's about the experience. It's about the consistent cadence of what that looks like, making sure that you're getting value out of the program at mass about your specific spend, and then also on an individual transaction level as well. So all the things.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess to bring it full circle, it all comes back to that true understanding of what your goals are in the first place, right? And that's how we quantify the success. I think, making sure you're very clear of what you want to achieve from the program, what the overarching objectives are, and then being able to hold a metric against those things, whether they're short-term goals or long-term goals. The key theme throughout this is really knowing what you want and being able to hone in on those, make it quantifiable, and track that both throughout the process, the decision-making process, but also post-appointment of a vendor to see how the actual decision has gone.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And then finally, so also a very topical question. I've seen a couple of day processes, a couple of year processes. So what's the right answer? How long should the evaluation process take?
Gosh, I'm interested to see what you think here too. It really depends. It depends if you've had the right stakeholders involved from the beginning. But to me, a process like this it should be probably a couple weeks out from final meeting. I always say that we think sometimes we just need more time. And it's like time doesn't give us decisiveness. Like we actually lose information and continuity with programs and what we learned in a meeting with time. So ironically, we think we need time, but what we really need is information. There's something that's lacking, following that up. So I typically say like intend to make your decision within a couple weeks of your final bid presentation that you've had of partners in. Also try to group those meetings somewhat close together. I know it's a big time ask of your employees that are participating, but if it's really spaced out, it's hard to make those quantifiable numbers and kind of go back to a data-driven approach. So it's like try to do them quickly and try to make a decision within a couple of weeks. It would be my take, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, look, it's such an interesting point around time, impacting the decision making process, because I would love to see the stats and hands up, don't have the data for this, but I would love to see the stats around if you made the decision the same day as your final bid, how many times would it look like the same decision you make after potentially months or weeks of
Right.
of toiling with the decision? And I reckon it would be a pretty high number that would be up there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think a lot of companies know what the right choice is for them, and then they might kind of get caught up in overthinking it and then ending up right where they started from. So yeah, if you have the data and the ability to then reflect on that data and make a choice, then hopefully it makes it a little bit easier. So just having and intending to stick to a timeline helps. Okay, James, so there's some general information on how long the evaluation process would take, but why don't you walk everyone through a little bit around like a decision toolbox and how to specifically build that timeline?
Yeah, 100%. And look, this might vary depending on the scale of the program, the amount of people involved. But the kind of core steps is obviously the market analysis and kind of really honing in on your needs. This is the critical point, as I said, to figure out kind of what is of utmost importance to you. And then based on that, you would look to get the initial interested TMCs in the mix, have them present to you, and off the back of that, look to create your shortlist. This is where obviously you could look to use the scoring index to kind of whittle that down and almost compartmentalize moving through the process. Looking to develop an RFP or an RFI if you need to. But again, if you're comfortable using the scoring index that we suggested or a similar scoring index, you could move through that. And then bringing back your shortlist. So giving the travel management companies another opportunity to present and getting their final proposals. Go back to the scoring index and the internal review. Ensure you're balancing those key priorities. Thinking about that triangle that I mentioned. Where do you kind of resonate most on that? And then looking to appoint the vendor and going through the onboarding process. Obviously, we've looked at this kind of week by week sequentially, which we know, is with the best will in the world. Very few processes move that smoothly. But it's the theory behind this. Look, even if you added in another week or 2 weeks for every step, you're still keeping the process under sort of that 3 month mark, which, as long as you're kind of moving over and being able to make a decision within, sort of those couple of months, I think it's a relatively healthy process for the bigger programs. And then obviously the smaller ones, you'd want to be trying to stick to a timeline more like this. And you can potentially skip a few steps, as I mentioned, like week 4, the RFP. You potentially might not even to go through multiple rounds of TMC presentations. So you could theoretically condense it into half the size for smaller programs, or potentially moving from the unmanaged space. But it is an exact science. I think the one thing I would say is make sure you've got clear deadlines. I know, speaking from personal experience, if it isn't set in stone, it's very easy for things to slip, and suddenly another task comes along, and you kind of the weeks turn to months. So that would be my main advice. Make sure there's very clear timelines. And as I said, try to compartmentalize it. You look at the process holistically, and it might seem quite overwhelming or daunting, but then you break it down into these actionable steps, and suddenly it's far more manageable and far more digestible. So that would be my take on things. But I don't know anything if you want to add, AV.
No, I think you nailed it there.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. I think one of the main questions is obviously the hot topic everywhere right now, but how can we use AI to help streamline this process?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? I mean, AI will definitely tell you, who is kind of the right choices for you. If you're wanting heavy tenure and heavy experience and a certain level of VIP services, there's obviously only going to be so many places you can go. And in the same way, if you want like extremely user-friendly technology or proprietary tech, similarly. So I think AI is phenomenal for whittling down the initial options. No one should be meeting with 10 plus agencies, or you're just going to completely exhaust yourself. So AI can help with whittling it down to perhaps only having 4 or 5 or max 6 in the initial process, just to make life a little bit easier. Once you've kind of used that triangle that you talked about around what are those of most critical importance to you, to just hone in. So for me, that's a great first step. And then to just pulse check some of those experiences. But beyond AI, I think that getting real testimonials, real, reflections of existing customers that are like-minded, similar industries, is also of critical importance. So AI can tell you many things in a general format, but then not forgetting to keep it personal too.
Perfect. And then probably time for one last question. I like this question. So, what are the most common pitfalls to avoid when choosing a TMC? And Amanda, I'm sure you have never not been selected, but imagining there was ever a scenario that a TMC, a company went with another TMC and then called you a few weeks later and said, look, we've made the wrong decision. We 100% would like to invite you to be our travel management company. What are the kind of general pitfalls that could happen?
Yeah, there's a couple. And so I was thinking about some statistics with this. It's like 71% of companies right now are evaluating TMCs in the data that we looked at. And of those, 67% are having a tough time balancing cost and experience. So it's like everyone's looking and they are stressed out about these two different elements. So to me, what happens is that sometimes the fixation becomes so much on cost that it goes into a very granular scope, and it goes into the scope of my people are smart, they're young, they're going to go online, the tech works, and even looking at almost like free options and not realizing that 20% of the time their travel is going to be disrupted, and another 20+% of the time it's going to be disrupted, some meetings changing in the other areas I was talking about before. So like they're going to just guide you back to the same carrier. You're not going to have that experience. And I would go as far as even saying like, travel is way too personal to be free. Like for me, that would be probably a red flag, that I don't want all robotics and automation in the instances where I've got people on the road spending time away from their families that are trying to get back home and are going to be disrupted and want a good experience. So to me, it's sometimes people getting really bought into a quick sell that haven't thought through the entire experience lens is one that I get kind of frequently. And then just not involving enough decision makers that are taking the whole process. It can go the other way too, where someone's worrying so much about the experience, they haven't brought in the cohort of people to really make sure that the tech is friendly to their generation and something that they want to use, and they're going to have high adoption too. So it's really just ensuring you're bringing the right people forward in that process, and that you've got a really strong plan for what that initial 3 months of partnership is going to look like. But I'd be interested to hear your answers too. But those are usually ones that end up coming back is, we bought a little too quickly and didn't think this through into how it affects every cohort of our business.
Yeah. And look, I guess the other thing is avoiding the temptation to get kind of drawn into the shiny new thing, right? Like with every industry, there's always a bit of smoke and mirrors, and there's always a temptation to get lulled into the kind of the new kind of tech trend or whatever it may be. And I think, look, travel is complex, but the formula behind it is relatively simple. Support your people, make sure you've got a good service, you're getting value for money, you've got visibility, and there's good technology in there. I think I've fallen into this trap myself, not from travel, but from other things. You get kind of drawn into buzzwords and the shiny new toys, and you kind of lose sight of actually what is truly the fundamentals of a travel program and what is of importance. So that would be my main thing. Do you absolutely need next generation machine learning 3.0 or whatever it may be, or do you need something that is actually going to really support your people in a crisis should anything like that happen? So that would be my thing. Really stick to your guns with what will support you and your people the best.
Yeah, I love that. And it's also like, why did you do this in the first place? Like, what pain are you personally solutioning? And our customers, it's really varied, why they got into this and what they're looking to get out of this partnership. So all the bells and whistles and different things you're sold, it's just remembering back to like, is this why I got into this, or what I'm trying to solve? So I think that's a great point. It's really making it about you and your business and how this is going to impact you more so than what you're being sold. It is also really important to keep at the front.
Perfect.
All righty.
Well, yeah, I think we're just about time. So look, we've covered obviously a pretty hefty topic there, and we've jumped into a few of the recommendations, the potential pitfalls, how to really take that pain of change and decision paralysis away. And as always, I'll always kind of put the caveat that this isn't an exact science. So as you can see, there's always more information that can be provided. We're always accessible and available if anyone watching this would like to hear more. So I guess from myself and Amanda, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you found this useful, and look forward to chatting to some of you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.